My name is Jeremy Evans, and who are you?
Mike Adams.
And Mike, you're a molder mediator.
I am. I'm all things mold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're proud of it, right?
I am. I'm proud of being a molder mediator. Yeah. I didn't set out to do that in life, but I'm happy to help people.
Yeah. No, there is some rewarding aspects to doing mold. And today we've got a podcast prepared for our listeners. We deal with a lot of mold. We do a lot of mold testing. It's funny when we actually did a podcast about mold testing, interpreting mold test results.
Yeah.
And it is funny how we send customers reports and then we get all kinds of questions.
Right.
Sometimes there's panic when there shouldn't be. Sometimes there's not enough panic.
Sometimes all of us are giving way too much credence to the test itself.
Yeah.
Both ways. Sometimes it comes back like it doesn't show much mold at all. Well, that's not necessarily a sign that all is well in the home.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they come back really, really bad, which, that usually is a sign that things are not good in the home, but there's overreaction. Every mold affects every person differently.
Yeah.
Because whether it be your DNA or your genetic makeup, different molds put out different mycotoxins. So it really is a moving target.
Yeah. Yeah. And we actually, right after that podcast, we talked about maybe we should at some point do a podcast where we go a little more in depth on some of these molds that we commonly see. I don't want to do like a huge lecture on any of these, but maybe just take a minute or two on each of the molds that we see most commonly on these tests and just see most commonly as we take air tests.
Yeah. Just
to give the listener or the student of mold a little bit of background about each of these. Now, every lab kind of does a little bit, picks different molds that they want to measure to a degree. I'd say there's 5 molds that are really, really common.
Really standard.
Standard.
Yeah, maybe 5 to 8. Yeah.
5 to 8, and then there's a few that are a little more, second tier, and then there's a bunch that are just the other 100,000 are lumped.
Right. And also recognize while we're talking about this, I want to bring up this is an important point, is that most tests, 90% of the tests that are being ran in the country are non-viable, right? So the lab is not growing anything. They're looking at them based on, I used to say for years, size, shape, and color, but not even color so much, size and shape. And they're trying to discern what type of mold it is from that. And it's sometimes it's kind of a crapshoot.
Sometimes it's subjective.
Yes,
is what
very
you're saying.
subjective. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we use a lab, a pretty well-known lab throughout that's based or has labs all over the world, and we're going to use theirs as a template. I think we'll just go over, like you said, maybe 8 or so different molds. I'm going to skip Aerobasidium because I've actually never, of all them, have you ever seen Aerobasidium come up on a test?
I don't think so.
I don't think I have either.
No.
And it comes standard on our air tests. And I've never seen it, so I'm not going to talk about it.
Okay, all right.
I don't think it's that important. And these are in alphabetical order, by the way. Okay. So we've got Aerobasidium, Basidiospores, Ketomium, Cladosporium, Fusarium, Penicillium aspergillus, Stachybotrys, Trichoderma, and Eulocladium. So Basidiospores, I see that all the time.
Yeah. When I see Basidiospores, my first thought is houseplants.
Yeah.
And pot plants in dirt. Yeah. Basidiospores love dirt.
Yeah, they love dirt, and I don't even know if I did some research on it before we did this podcast. Yeah. I don't know if there's a ton to say other than what you just said. Yeah. Like it grows on dirt.
It's a common outdoor mold.
I'll throw in a couple more. Gardens, woodlands. Wood is a very common.
Yeah.
It's a very commonly associated with wood, soil, plant, fruit rot. On the indoors, it can get into appliances, carpets, walls, plywood, glue, sinks. and herbs, again, which is a plant, spices, cereals. It's very ubiquitous. I mean, this thing is everywhere. I'd say not every test pulls up Basidiospores indoor and out, but
I bet almost, yeah.
like 90-something percent of them, you're going to get some of that. So,
and it's not a particularly dangerous mold.
Yeah. As I've researched, it's not known to release mycotoxins. It's funny. They'll never say no for sure Basidiospores does not release mycotoxins. They'll say it's not known to release mycotoxins. So it's known as a benign mold in that regard, but of course it has allergenic properties.
Sure.
I don't know if there's any mold that doesn't have the potential to produce allergenic responses. So again, if you see that on a test, it's not ultra worrisome unless, if it's just maybe a few spores they caught. Yeah. But if it gets high, then it can start to
I think with any mold, if it gets really high, something's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. So Basidiospores, that's the first one on the test. The next one was Ketomium.
Ketomium.
So let me pull up Ketomium. Mike, you know about Ketomium. You've seen that one before.
Yeah. I learned this years ago that a good amount of cases where we do a home inspection and a home test and Ketomium pops up on the indoor test. A good portion of the time there is somebody really, really sick in the home. Mm-hmm. It's a nasty mold. It really is. It's terrible.
Yeah, and just so you know, if you're not visualizing, Ketomium spelled with CHAE, and the rest is very similar. But Ketomium, it's I've heard people refer to it as the other black mold.
Right.
And again, not so much based on color, which we'll talk about maybe in a minute. Okay. Color's not so much important, but I think it's because it's very toxic.
Very toxic. Yeah.
I mean, it can really cause havoc on people's health.
And when we say toxic, we're talking like neurological issues, compromised immune system issues. It really does a number on your body.
Yeah, you even told me, was it yesterday? You're like, Stachybotrys black, aka black mold, toxic mold, gets all the attention for things. But in your experience, didn't you say Ketomium may wreak more havoc?
From my experience, I would say it does. Yeah.
On health?
Yeah.
Even more than black mold, huh?
Or whatever.
Stachybotrys.
Yeah, even more than Stachy. I think so. I really do.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it produces a plethora of different mycotoxins. Ketoatrosin, I'm not going to do all these, but ketochromins, ketosin, ketomin, and then I can see like 4 or 5 different other toxins that those produce. And I'm actually going to read a few things about Ketomium. I mean, it's usually associated with a water damage issue. Mm-hmm. Like different molds like to feed on different things. Basidiospores on the wood and plants. Yeah. Ketomium, what does it like to feed on?
It likes, what is the word? Paper and sheetrock.
Cellulose material.
Yeah, cellulose. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Basically, what our houses are built of.
Right.
Yeah, it loves cellulose. So, as well as like house dust, wallpaper, cardboard. And here's an interesting thing. So, Ketomium's development, I guess, apparently is very fast. It just takes a couple weeks, and it can really just take over an area. And the spores are cemented together by mucilage, and they're trapped by hairs. And so not very many of them become airborne.
Right.
And until the mold is completely dried out. So when it's dried out or it gets disturbed
or stressed,
right, it'll spore out. But it's very uncommon to see, really high spore counts of Ketomium. I think we talked about that once before.
In fact, I've taught techs across the country when I work with them that if you see Ketomium on a test, before the house has been treated, if you see any Ketomium, you probably have a significant issue somewhere in that house, because they don't want to go airborne very badly.
And you've said before they're kind of housed in this mycelium, which is that hairy thing. Maybe I was
my research from years ago, and I've almost forgotten more than I can remember, but it seems that they're in what they call a parathecium.
Oh, parathecium.
Yeah. It's almost like, in my mind, I'm picturing like a pea pod, and you got the peas in there. It's just kind of trapped in that little organism, and they don't want to release until they're stressed. Once they're stressed, like any other mold, when it gets stressed, it's trying to survive its own species, so it sends spores out everywhere.
Yeah.
To try to survive.
Yeah. So Ketomium, that's one of the zero tolerance molds.
That's a bad one. Yeah.
Just if you see one, probably means a lot more. That's one to keep your eyes out for. Next in our alphabetical chain here, Cladosporium. Again, a very common mold.
Very common.
So 90+% you're going to see Basidiospores. How often do you see Cladosporium?
Like good 80%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right up there.
Yeah. Very common. Pretty much every outdoor test you're going to get it. Yeah. Pretty much any indoor test you're going to get some Cladosporium. So again, if there's just a few on your indoor test, it's probably just outdoor air.
Right.
But if you start to get up to 5 and 10, 15, 20 Cladosporium, that could be an issue.
Yeah. I want to point out something why we're talking about different molds and the counts that you see on reports.
Yeah.
It's really important to understand that spores themselves are going to come and go in your home. That's just part of life. You go outside, you're breathing spores. You go inside, hopefully your air is as good as your outside air. You're going to be breathing spores. Where you get into danger in homes is when you have an accumulation of mold to where it is established somewhere or multiple places in the home, and it's growing, and sometimes it spores, sometimes it doesn't. But as it grows, it emits mycotoxins. That's the real issue. It's almost like when we do an air quality test, we're testing to see if anything's in the air, but that's really not the issue so much. Yeah. It's the mycotoxins and the established mold in these little pockets throughout the house are more the concern than the actual airborne spores.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. This is just a random fact about Cladosporium. Cladosporium is a large genus. It has over 700 varieties. So it's very, very prevalent. And then here's kind of an interesting thing, is talking about health effects. Yeah. Again, this is another one that's not known to produce mycotoxins. They don't know yet, but they suspect to know. However, it can cause... I've actually ran into people who maybe their doctor said, Cladosporium is my thing. I need to stay away from it. Infants are especially sensitive to Cladosporium allergens. A skin test study observed the allergic reaction of the skin in 42% of children under the age of 4.
From Ketomium.
Cladosporium.
I'm sorry, Cladosporium.
Yeah.
Wow, interesting.
So just an allergenic response to the skin.
Yeah.
So kind of interesting. It's one of those that you're going to see it on every test, and I don't think it's a huge deal, but unless it gets up a little bit higher.
Right.
So that's Cladosporium. Now you got me saying Ketomium instead of Cladosporium. In the alphabetical line here, now we come to Fusarium. What comes to your mind when you think Fusarium?
I think a lot of them are Arians, but few Fusariums. That's all I could come up with.
Yeah, that's very good. That's about right, because that's another one I don't see very often.
No, we don't. Yeah, few Fusariums.
Just a few
Fusariums.
Cases.
Yeah,
I've seen it maybe a few times, and I don't know about you, but this one as well as Trichoderma. Whenever I see Fusarium, I'm usually seeing some other stuff going on.
Yeah.
Like I'm seeing some Stachy and some Ketomium and some other things mixed in there with Fusarium. Most of the research about Fusarium honestly talks about wheat and corn and different crops.
Right.
Like Fusarium is a very crop-oriented mold. Farmers have a horrible time with this, trying to get it off their crops.
Not a heyday.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Or they do have it. Yeah. Depends. Yeah, and there's, if you Google Fusarium disease, it'll go into all kinds of, that's a plant disease that destroys crops and things. But then this one also, this one's known to be toxic. It can cause havoc in people's health just by inhaling the spores. I'm trying to remember if there's a name of the toxin. Not that it matters that much, but it looks like
Fusarium, if I remember right, can cause eye infections too. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Eye infections, skin and nail infections, sinusitis, pneumonia. Yeah, a lot of the arthritis, a lot of the stuff. So this is one, we don't know a lot about it. And again, it's not ultra prevalent unless it's a severely water damaged place from my understanding. And so I think it's under researched, but I bet it's wreaking havoc, in ways we don't understand as well, is my guess. But if you have Fusarium come up on a test, I would definitely be concerned. Okay, Fusarium. Next one. Let's talk about Aspergillus. So, Mike, you, and this is on not just our lab, but every lab test or report that I've looked at, they always lump together Penicillium aspergillus.
Always on a non-viable test.
On a non-viable test, which is the most common one.
Yeah. So in other words, they're looking at based on size and shape. They're trying to identify which mold it is. Penicillium and Aspergillus really show up as just kind of a speck on that cassette, and so that's why they don't even try to differentiate the two. They can't differentiate them. They look too much alike, so they just put them on the same line.
So that's why they're together on an air test.
Right. Yeah.
There's no like.
No, they're not even like cousins or anything. They're just they can't tell the difference.
It's like a they just have no clue which one it is, so they just lump it together. Now that's fine. I think that's fine, except for depending on if it's Penicillium and what kind, or Aspergillus and what kind, that could mean something bad, right?
Yeah, but I've given this speech 1,000 times to people that regardless of the type of mold, you don't want to mess with it. So if you feel like your home needs remediation, you need to get it remediated. I would never do so much research that I've decided, yes, I have an elevated mold load, but it looks like all the molds that I have are non-toxic. So I think I'm okay. That's a bad train of thought.
Yeah, I really agree with that.
Yeah.
I will say, so on Aspergillus, I think I can't remember how many. Actually, let me look. I think I might have it right here. There are 40. So there are hundreds of different species of Aspergillus, according to the CDC, but only 40, I shouldn't say only, but 40 of them can affect the health of people, of beings. So that's one that's kind of deceiving, because that actually, Penicillium aspergillus, since they lump them together, I see those pretty regularly too.
Yeah, and you don't think too much about them.
Yeah, it becomes like, it's a common mold, and I see it on outdoor tests too, pretty commonly.
Right.
And so I guess that's the danger. You're like, I saw it on the outdoor. Yeah. But if there are several hundred Aspergillus strains and then 40 of them can be toxic and cause problems.
Well, what if oftentimes we run an outdoor test and an indoor test and compare the two using the outdoor as a baseline, which that's a whole nother podcast in and of itself. But what if, for example, your outdoor count, you had 200 Penicillium / Aspergillus, but those were the benign type. Yeah. You've got 190 inside your house, but they're the toxic type. Yeah. The average person would say, I'm okay because I'm below outdoor counts. Well, no, you're not. You got yourself a problem there.
Yeah, you could be Aspergillus flavus.
Yes. Yes.
That's so the big two, unless you have other ones you've heard of, but Aspergillus flavus and Aspergillus fumigatus. So those are the ones you've heard.
Those are the two, yeah.
Yeah, and they're associated with some of the big mycotoxins. In fact, I think it's aflatoxin, B1 and aflatoxin B2 or the mycotoxins that flavus produces. So, and those are known to cause liver damage, cirrhosis, immunosuppressive and carcinogenic, diseases and problems.
It's bad.
It's not a good one. In fact, you talked about Ketomium and how Stacky gets all the attention. Ketomium doesn't as much, but it can maybe cause more problems. I feel like even Aspergillus, Penicillium aspergillus, lumping them together, I've seen that cause some serious issues too. Yeah. I've had people call me and say, my doctor said I've got a Penicillium or Aspergillus problem.
We've had a lot of customers that have, I believe it's called aspergillosis.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it gets in their lungs and just wreaks havoc on their health.
Yeah. Aspergillus flavus is the second most common species to be identified in human infection, besides Aspergillus fumigatus. So fumigatus, I'm trying to see if there's anything I wanted to note here about the fumigatus. Yeah, I mean, it can cause pulmonary aspergillosis, skin and nail infections, all kinds of lung problems. Yeah, fumigatus and flavus. So again, not necessarily that important to know unless your doctor's trying to test your mycotoxins or whatever. But that's Aspergillus. Penicillium. Again.
Wait. Most people say penicillin. That's what they make penicillin out of. So that's healthy.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
Well, I agree that, yes, that is what they make penicillin out of, but that does not necessarily mean that you are safe in your home if you have penicillium.
Yeah, like if you have penicillium in your home, maybe you don't need to take antibiotics, is what you're saying.
Yeah. It's not a vitamin. It's an antibiotic.
Yeah, exactly. And this one's also pretty dang common. I mean, 300 different species, and some of those are known to be fine as far as from the toxic perspective. Yeah. These ones can be highly allergenic, though.
We did a hotel years ago in Ogden, Utah, and it was a fairly main hotel chain that you would recognize if I said who it was. But they started to remodel a section of their hotel, and they started to pull the wallpaper back. And it was just almost solid black behind that wallpaper. And we surmised that maybe, the wallpaper where you cut off the length and you soak it in water and then you pull it up.
Yep.
We just kind of surmised that they must have just had some really, really moldy water, and they just kept going with it to be able to grow that much mold behind the wallpaper. I mean, we don't know that for sure, but that was my best guess. But in that case, that was all penicillium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow, you guys tested it and it was penicillium?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so penicillium can produce citrinin, which you've heard of, right? You told me that. Psychopiazonic acid, penicillic acid. It produces a number of different mycotoxins that can, depending on the kind. One of the famous, so you talked about penicillin. Penicillium chrysogenum, that is the strain or the species of penicillium that they make penicillin from. Yeah, and this is, I don't know if you knew this, it's kind of a random story, but the reason it got its name is because the guy who discovered it, he looked at it and he thought it looked like a paintbrush. And penicillin is the word for paintbrush in Latin.
I did not know that.
Yeah, I did not know that either.
It's a fun fact, Jerry.
Yeah, it's a very fun fact. And I was telling you this before the show, Mike. Penicillium only produces penicillin when it's under stress.
Yes.
Kind of similar to when it's like sporing, I imagine.
Yeah.
If it's growing and thriving, there's no penicillin.
It's a completely different animal. That's not the right word, but it's a completely different animal. It's the same with any kind of mold.
Yeah.
The healthy, growing, not healthy, that's not the right word. The thriving, growing mold is not sporing.
Yeah.
But it can be very, very dangerous and be emitting mycotoxins like crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why even air quality tests just seem so strange to me. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're testing to see if your mold is stressed in your house, basically.
Yeah.
We're not testing to see if you don't have mold, because if it is growing happy mold, it's not going to be stressing.
Yeah.
So really, a positive test just shows us, you got some stressed out mold somewhere in your home.
Yeah, and if it's growing and thriving, that's probably worse.
Much worse. Yeah. Yeah, honestly, it is. Yeah. Other than I guess there's a case for the more it spores out, the more little pockets of mold you're creating, so it's getting worse and worse every day as opposed to staying fairly confined.
No, it's true.
But yeah, it's not great.
Yeah,
So,
it's not a great system.
yeah.
This is the last fun fact. Penicillium is known as the cheese mold too. People who like Brie cheese, Stilton. Is it Roquefort? Is that how you pronounce it?
Roquefort. Well, I don't know. I'm from Utah.
Camembert. These are some of these famous fancy cheeses.
Yeah.
Thank your Penicillium for those. It helps with those. So I mean, again, if they're not, from what I understand, like the example of the penicillin, it's not like you were ingesting the mold. They're excreting this penicillin that comes out when it's stressed,
Right.
and they're isolating it, and they make it good for human consumption.
It's just not a good argument to say penicillin's healthy, right? So I'm okay.
Okay, let's talk about Stachybotrys. We've already kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
But I guess here's a question. They call it, people say black mold, and there's really no such thing as black mold. But why do they call black mold Stachybotrys?
There was the media grabbed onto the term black mold.
Mm-hmm.
I think clear back in maybe the early 2000s, there were a number of high-profile celebrities that had black mold in their home, and a lot of them actually passed away from it or got really, really sick.
Yeah.
And that term just kind of stuck.
Yeah.
But Stacky can be any number of colors depending on what it's feeding on.
Yeah.
I would say Stacky probably more commonly is greenish than it ever is black.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I even read somewhere that Stacky can be off colors like pink and some of these other colors.
By the way, I saw these shows where they flip homes.
Yeah.
I saw when there was a contractor working there, and they started tearing out some tile in the bathroom, and they found mold, and the gentleman that was tearing out the tile said, "Well, it's not Stacky, so that's good." Well, you don't know that it's not Stacky. There's no way you can tell
just by looking at it.
By looking, yeah.
Yeah, actually, maybe can I tangent right there, Mike?
Yeah.
There's a pretty reputable organization, Hayward Score. Anyways, they have some old mold experts on their team, and there's Ask an Expert questions thing, and I was reading over this just before or just yesterday, and so they're asking about mold and color, and he says, well, mold growth is often black, gray, or green. It can be brown, purple, orange, pink, yellow, red, white, or any combination of those colors. And the same mold can be different colors in different conditions and can even change over time. And I wish I could show you this picture, but the image on the left side shows a photo of fresh mold, and it's kind of yellow and white. 3 days later, it's, what color would you say that is? Purple and black?
Yeah, that's almost black.
Kind of purple and black. So same mold, just a matter of time, can change that drastically just in a few days. Mold color does not tell you anything about toxicity. So, the mold is black. It must be toxic, or it must be Stachybotrys, or and then I like this little note there that this expert says, you should pay attention to mold of any colors. It's kind of what we've been saying. You shouldn't be like, it's a white mold.
It's a white mold. It's
see,
good. Yeah.
I can think, because people see white mold and it just looks like an innocuous powder.
I've actually had people say that's mildew. Like, if it's white, that's mildew. Like, no, that's
yeah.
And mildew is mold. I'm sorry, but
yeah. So I think Stacky, I think that's good to say. I mean, we've talked about this before, but it's famous for releasing trichothecenes.
Trichothecene, yeah.
And then there's probably some more, but that's the one that's coming to my mind.
Trichothecene is the one that we always talk about that is in, these rogue nations that built, well, I guess all nations make warfare, but
yeah,
that's what they make nerve gas out of, is trichothecenes.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's Stachybotrys. And then we've got two last molds, Trichoderma and Eulocladium. Again, I kind of lump these together with Fusarium. I don't see them very often.
Yeah.
And if I do, in my experience, they're typically lumped together with like some Stachy and some other things. Have you had much experience with Trichoderma?
I don't see it much.
Yeah, I don't see it much either. It makes me wonder why it's listed as one of it made the 10, the cut for the top 10. But yeah, Trichoderma, I mean, there's a couple hundred different species in the genus. It's one of those where they isolate some of the genes in there and they actually use it for some good in plant and kind of fending off, bacteria and other things for plants, as far as I know. But in a health situation, actually, this is an interesting fact. They kind of, at least this article I read, lumped together with causing similar effects to Stachybotrys on the health. Again, I think it's less researched than Stachy and some of those more popular ones, but it's definitely, and actually I should look real quick. Mycotoxins, I think little's known about it, but I'm pretty sure it's a worrisome mold that if you see it on a test, go the other way. Right. And then the last one, Eulocladium. Just a real fascinating mold that I don't know much about either. I will say, this is something kind of interesting. Eulocladium, on some air tests, some companies will measure alternaria instead of Eulocladium.
Yeah.
And they're actually, in many people's minds, interchangeable. It's like the same thing. I think even if you look on Wikipedia, it says Eulocladium species resembles alternaria, and they were once part of the same genus. And then who knows what happened? There was a battle amongst these mycologists, mycologists, and they decided they weren't exactly the same or something, but very similar in how they operate and look, and they produce mycotoxins.
Yeah.
So, not good. And so that's kind of a summary of kind of the major molds that we might see on air tests.
Yeah, I still go back to if you could really understand just how small amount of air those air tests pull in, and then couple that with the idea that the lab, when they look at that little sticky cassette inside that, or that sticky slide inside that cassette, they're only looking at just a swath of that, right? And then they are trying to interpret based on size and shape, and sometimes color, but mostly size and shape, what type of mold that is. It's just really important not to put too much faith into these tests.
Yep.
I did have a guy once tell me he was an indoor air hygienist, and he said, Mike, you got to realize why these tests were invented. They were invented so that a traditional mold remediator can go in and whatever space they just tore out and rebuilt and is contained, they're going to run their air scrubbers in there, and they want to be able to show that within that contained space, it's clean.
Yeah.
So these were basically built to show very, very little mold.
Yeah.
And that's what they're for. And, we've kind of expanded it to use these to diagnose whether a house is healthy or not, and that can be kind of problematic.
Yeah. It was just the other week, a customer asked me for the equation that the lab used to calculate the per cubic meter squared, or per cubic meter column.
Off of the raw count.
Off of the raw count.
Right.
And he's like, I have a little bit of, knowledge of microbiology and some of these things, and I've run the numbers, and I'm not coming up with the same thing the lab is.
Yeah.
Can you help me? And so I reached out to our lab representative, and I was like, I don't know what's going on here. So she sent me the equation, and this is you've told me what you just said. You've told me before how they only are measuring a portion of the slide.
Right.
Well, that's what was hanging up this guy's equation. He forgot to divide essentially by 4 because they're only measuring a fourth of the slide.
Yeah, a fourth swath of that.
And I don't know if you've seen those air cassettes. They're actually really small.
Yeah.
So it's already small, and they're only picking a fourth of that slide, and then they're using that to give you numbers.
And then couple that with the fact that if you have a unusually dusty site that you're pulling that test in, that dust is hitting that sticky slide in there, making it so that some molds can't stick to it.
Yeah.
You get a rating on the report that says background debris.
Yeah.
Whenever I see a background debris of 4 or 5, that usually tells me that it could be much worse than it is.
Yeah.
They just can't stick because it's full of background debris.
Yeah. Can't stick, or it's stuck and then it got covered with dirt.
Yeah, they can't see it. Yeah.
Either way,
Yeah.
it's not maybe the most accurate. Well, I think that's a good stopping point, Mike. I hope it was helpful. I actually learned some stuff going into some of these molds, but again, I think I liked your conclusion that you gave kind of earlier, which is because we don't get caught up in this too much either, where it's like, I don't really care if it's flavus or whatever. You've got a lot of mold in the house.
Yeah.
We need to get rid of it.
Yeah.
I don't want you to have allergenic problems, or I don't want you to have toxic problems. I mean, either way, we don't want someone to have health problems.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to maybe have a cursory knowledge of some of this stuff, and especially those that are trying to heal from mold illness. It's helpful to sometimes know the specific thing that's causing them problems, and then, as a remediator, we can keep that in mind and maybe, in our after testing, look for, that more pointedly than we otherwise would.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think it's just, let's just get rid of your mold.
Let's just take care of your home. Yeah.
Get it healthy.
Right.
So, anyways, thanks everyone for joining us, and I guess that's all for me.
That's all we have.
Facebook Live and everyone else. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.
Thanks.